people say hacks in DeFi, most hacks aren't really hacks. People say, I think exploit's a better term. Basically, what people do that they figure out a way with something in the code to make the protocol do something that was unintended, right? And that's because these protocols are so complicated. Like they're like not, I wouldn't say so complicated, but they're pretty complicated, and it's kind of impossible as a developer, especially if you're a small team, right? Because you may not have that much money, you're a startup, um, to figure out every single attack or edge case that someone's going to go after this protocol with or for, right? It's just like kind of impossible. And so most protocols in the early stages, and frankly, or intent, like the intention is that in the early stages, they will have what's called like admin keys.
Welcome to Unraveling Crypto. Today we have Orlando Cosme. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Been listening for a bit, so very excited to actually be able to be a guest.
Yeah. So Orlando, you are probably one of the, also I always say this, but it's true. Like the first few guests that I've like had on have been the ones that I've connected with and when I first started my journey. So it's really awesome to see the growth that has happened since the very beginning and where you are at. So I love to start with, what are you grateful for?
I would say my family, friends, and health first and foremost. I think I think being in the crypto space sometimes people. I think what people are building is very important, but I think also we need to not lose sight of what's actually important, and those are very close and intimate relationships and our health. Because I think sometimes people get too much in the weeds, kind of lose track of their health, and so yeah, so those are the two things I'm grateful for. Knock on wood. I'm generally healthy, and my relationships with my friends and family.
I love that. And I think it's like the simple things, always back to the basics. But I agree
Yeah,
with you. I think that since being in the space, I've definitely been way more on the internet, phone, and less touching
yeah,
grass.
exactly. Go out, touch grass, get dinner with some people, hang out with friends, see your family. Uh, I am a culprit of this. Of not, calling my mom enough, but call your
Oh,
mom.
yeah.
All of that.
Yeah, for sure. So what's the next question is, I'd love to ask all the guests, what's your superpower? So that thing that you've been doing probably your whole life and is really natural to you.
Yeah, I think so. It's not like it's probably like an unorthodox superpower. I think, but I think one thing, and I didn't really realize this until I think like later, much later in life. But I think one thing that I am very good at, compared to other people, is very quickly just picking up something that's completely new, completely out of my element, and getting like. And usually, I'm not the kind of person that I'm really good at everything I try in a first instance. I'm actually not. Like I tend to not be so great, but I'm pretty good at just picking something up, really figuring it out, and learning how to improve and learning how to get better. And I think a lot of people, whether it be for like, 'cause I think a lot of people maybe may know what to do to get better, but they don't actually do it. They don't actually like execute and like stick to a plan or disciplined enough to do it. And I think that's something just throughout life that has helped me a lot is kind of just picking something up and just like figuring out what are the things I need to do to get to that next level and actually doing it. And that includes things like, I was like, I liked sports as a kid, but like wasn't that great when I entered high school. And by the time I graduated high school, I was like the captain of both my football and wrestling team. And then I and like was not that great in the beginning, right? I kept just like improving myself. And then same thing kind of happened with like academics, job stuff. Right now, for example, on the side, so I'm half Dominican and Puerto Rican, but for my whole entire life could not dance salsa like at all. It was awful. picked up started taking lessons like a little bit over a year ago. I'm the only person in my class that's still doing it, and I've like improved significantly. So like just like in different aspects of life, I think I've just been able to pick things up, starting a business, getting to tech, etc., being a lawyer, and just learning how to get better at these things. And I think it's something I didn't realize, I think, until later in life, but it really is, I think, a pretty good skill and superpower because it kind of makes me very, I think, adaptable to things. And being able to pick things up, like, and now I feel like I've had such a large breadth of different experiences that I can kind of make a lot of connections, connect the dots, etc. But like, basically, and I guess like to summarize it more succinctly, knowing how to improve, I
Yeah.
guess, is a superpower.
I mean, I have to say this is like an incredible superpower to have because you said it really well where most people know what they need to do to get better, but they don't do it. Right. And it's
Yeah.
like the execution of it is the consistency. And I think I'm probably gonna butcher this, but I've heard this say where it's like top athletes, some of the best are not necessarily the ones born with talent, but it's just like a little bit of talent and then a whole lot of consistency and commitment and practice and reiterating. So it kind of just reminded me of that. And that's really powerful because especially where we are at with so many new things coming at us, being able to dive in and stay the course is pretty powerful. So that's awesome.
If you don't mind me asking, and flipping the script a bit, what would you say is your superpower?
Ooh, my superpower. I think somewhat similar. I would say like I just do it. I've always been able to execute things really well. If I want to do something, I don't hesitate. Like I go all in. So yeah, if I want to do something, I don't overthink it. I just dive right on in, and I think I've always done that from a really young age. And yeah, so I think that would be my superpower. Just I'm gonna
Yes.
steal the Nikes
Let's do it.
tagline.
Yeah, that's a good one because a lot of people don't. So that's good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know you are. Well, you've had like everyone in crypto has other life experiences. Startup, VC, lawyer, attorney, and then right now you are. Is it a founder? Yeah, founder for Lexproof. But tell us a little bit about how you got into crypto and what drew you in.
Yeah, I think the first time I heard of crypto was because I was in college and people were buying drugs on Silk Road with Bitcoin. And I actually remember I did read. I remember reading the Bitcoin white paper during that time, and I was like, okay, I don't know, yeah, whatever. Like I just didn't really put much thought into it because I was like, okay, like so cool. This like it's like basically like internet, some kind of internet money that you can then use to do illegal stuff online. Okay, whatever. It's like I just the whole like conception, the whole idea of I think what crypto ended up becoming, and even Bitcoin itself ended up becoming. I didn't even have like the imagination for that at that time, just because again that was kind of like the first time I ever saw crypto. Um, Fast forward to 2017, so this is the ICO boom. I was in law school, and actually one of my roommates, who I love him, but he's not exactly like the smartest person. He's kind of an idiot, and I mean that in a very endearing way, but like not someone who I'd be like, oh, like they put in thoughtful, rigorous analysis into what they were like investing in, right? He really got into the ICO boom. And I remember talking to him about it, and we were going back and forth. And he was basically just gambling, right? There was like no rhyme or reason. So I kind of like looked back into crypto again, because like, it just started getting hot again. And again, there was really nothing there. It was kind of like vaporware. I was just like, okay, seems like people just gambling money. And then get back to 2020, now DeFi summer. I now start seeing people who I would say really respect, kind of talking about crypto more and getting into it. I just kind of like noticed it in the air, right? Like there was like this increased tick in interest. So I kind of go back, kind of like research again, and this time there's actually like stuff going on, right? I see DeFi, and I start getting very interested. Um, and then I think the thing for me that really just kind of like, like light bulb just kind of like blew my mind away was actually helium. If you're not familiar with Helium, or if anyone's not familiar with Helium, it's basically kind of this like internet, this wireless internet network for kind of like Internet of Things. So think like devices that don't really require that much like bandwidth, but you can think maybe like a thermostat or something that's working on the internet, something like that, right? Like things that don't require much bandwidth. And basically they were creating, or are, I guess, although they're not doing as hot anymore, but they're basically creating this kind of distributed network where literally instead of like being beholden to a wireless company for your network, individuals would just buy these like routers, hook them up at home, and basically mine and basically would provide Wi-Fi in exchange for like the Helium token. So these people are getting paid, just for like setting up this like router thing at their home. Um, and that project, I think, just really blew the lid off of what I thought was possible with crypto. Because like because again, with DeFi, I saw the finance aspect of it, and I thought it was very interesting, and so I kind of kept digging. But that, like, the idea of like, you can apply this concept of a user-owned network to a wireless network. That was like my jaw dropping, like, oh wow, this is going to change the world. Like, this is actually revolutionary. And so it took me into looking to Helium, I think, to really get it. And since then, I would say I've been like just down the rabbit hole ever since.
Yeah. I mean, I want to highlight something that I hear a lot of people that are coming in or after interviewing a few is that they've heard about this before and there was just sketchy stuff about it. And then like slowly but surely you like something then like catches fire and then like you're all in. And I think it's really important to highlight that for anybody that's still kind of new or not really sure because everyone at some point thought this was sketchy and there are sketchy things. So it's like let's like let's all agree on that. But there's a lot of great and a lot of good, and definitely this is the future. Um, Last year, you one thing is like being involved in it or you know participating, engaging. Another thing is going all in with work. You took this leap of faith last year. What was your thought process behind this, and why did you do it?
Yeah, to be honest, it wasn't that difficult for me, for several reasons. Number one, um, I had decided probably about maybe like a year and a half or so before then, that I was gonna like start my own company, and do my own thing. And I wasn't quite ready yet though at the time, and I wasn't quite sure what it would be. Like, I actually didn't think it would potentially be like a tech startup. Maybe it might be, maybe not. Because there are other types of businesses, like the different types of bootstrap businesses, more cash flow related businesses, than like a venture scalable $1 billion startup. But I knew then that I was going to do my own thing. About a year and a half. So I was kind of like had my antenna out, for kind of preparing myself. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't when I did kind of take the leap and take the plunge. I wasn't planning on doing it necessarily right then. Like, if you had asked me 3 months before, I'd have been like, no, no, no. It's like, not ready. I would still need probably like a year or two more years. But um, I had already decided that like I was gonna eventually like go out and take a swing, and the reason for that was so just kind of getting to my like life career, or I guess like career journey. So went to Penn from the University of Pennsylvania. First out of college as a trader, so I was an interest rate trader at Citigroup. So I was trading like inflation-linked government bonds and inflation-linked derivatives. Decided I was going to go to law school. Had a year to kill. Worked at like WeWork just before they imploded, doing business development and expansion. Went to law school and then worked at a firm called Sidley Austin in Chicago. Their claim to fame, it's where Barack and Michelle Obama met each other. I'm saying all this because to drive home the point that I've had a pretty diverse career, and I've worked at like quote like places that are considered like really good or whatever, prestigious or whatever whatever you want to say. And about a year into working at that firm in Big Law, um, I remember I think I took like Labor Day off, right? And it was actually the first day in a year that I actually billed no hours, right? Like, it was like my actual only like first day off. Um, and that day, I remember specifically, right? It was this day, and because I remember because like it like allowed me to kind of just like take some separation out and like just reevaluate my life in that like one day that I wasn't working. And I was just like, fuck this. I was just like, well, a few things. Number one, being a big law like partner, like eventually, the path is that you eventually become a partner. And throughout that time, I had worked with many partners, working directly with many partners. And, you think like, oh, you make it to the promised land, you're going to be this partner, but you're still in this like massive organization. And your life doesn't get better. Actually, especially at the junior partner level, I think they're the worst it's the worst job at a big law firm, I think. Not even the junior people, because they're still trying to prove themselves. Um, and they have to take ownership over everything. So they're like their entire lives are basically work. And so forget about being like a good parent, being a good partner. And that's like your life. And because it's like legal, like practicing law, right? It's like you're doing all this to kind of go back and forth on like a comma in a legal brief, right? That like lawyers have to be perfect, right? There's a reason for it. Like I get it, right? But it's just like, is this what I want to do in my life? Like, basically, not spend time with my kids on a Saturday at like 3 afternoon because I'm going back and forth with this associate over like the placement of this comma. No. But even related to like the other experiences I had, right? Like being a trader or whatever, there's still a lot of that, right? And I'm not shy of. I'm not a person who like doesn't work hard, right? Again, that was like the first day of the year I didn't work, but I was just like, you know what? I'm working so hard. I bet that in 10 years, which is like the path it takes to make a partner, roughly, I can just go out, take swings. I can take a swing, fail, take a swing, fail, take a swing, fail. I'll probably take 3 or 4 swings during that time, and all I need to do is be successful once, and I would be wildly more successful than had I like waited and be a partner. Probably make way more money, have my autonomy, and enjoy my life way more if I just bet on myself. And so that's kind of the conclusion I came to. And I was like, from that day on, I was like, I'm going to bet on myself. Don't know exactly when, but it's going to happen. So I had my antenna out basically. And then that's kind of just the background of, and then I was like pretty involved in the Saks community. Um, we saw this, me and my co-founder saw this opening for DAOs. There's a little more into how we met and stuff, but like basically saw this opening for like DAO infrastructure. And so we were just like, you know what, let's just like take the plunge and let's do it. And I was kind of mentally already prepared. Again, was faster than I would have probably liked or what was in my initial plan or more soon. But I was like ready to go. And like, I ended up pivoting to another law firm, worked at another law firm. But that whole time I was just like counting the days until I'm like out of there and ready to go and start my own thing. So it wasn't that hard for me to like take the plunge.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if anybody else is listening to this, they'll relate and they'll feel inspired because, especially, I mean, my boyfriend's an attorney too, and I know how hard it is to get to being an attorney and being able to shift or pivot out of that is, I think, is an identity also like shift that you have to do. But there's a lot of good things coming out of it. I just, even anyone that wants to just change to a different vocation, I don't think it's as easy as it is. And even the process that you walked us through, it's like it takes years maybe where this is something that you want to do, but you don't know exactly the timing. And perhaps the timing you always say like it's going to be a little further out. What plan?
You don't just do it.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah,
don't
yeah.
just do it. Yeah,
But the
yeah,
plans, the funny thing is like plans never go as planned. They just are there to help you. But I don't know. This is really interesting and exciting to hear how you just
yeah.
pivoted into Web
Yeah,
three.
I basically just like needed that slight little push,
Yeah,
and I got in that slight little push, and
yeah.
I was just like, "That's all I need. Let's go."
So I mean, I guess moving now, one of the topics I wanted to discuss with you was to break down a little bit of what's going on with the SEC, regulatory, all of these things, because I think, well, one, anyone like the community that's listening in is, I feel like it's always placed like a lot of crypto natives too, and they love to hear from you, but also very newbies where they hear all of these headlines, they don't really know what's going on. And I love to explore a little bit about that, which then leads to Lexproof, which I want to chat about because I've been diving into zero knowledge, but it kind of goes beyond what I can sometimes comprehend. So so let's dive into that. Before we do though, I'd love to kind of like level set with DeFi. what is, if you can just give a little brief of what is DeFi and where is that industry right now, or where's that space right now?
Yeah, so DeFi or decentralized finance is so. I mean, there's no like official term for DeFi, obviously, but most people, when you're talking about DeFi, what they're talking about is financial applications, or I guess like I don't want to say services, but basically financial services that are run on decentralized permissionless blockchains. And so what this means usually is that you have some kind of smart contract protocol, which basically just means just like some kind of algorithm, right? That is basically providing the financial service. And so, okay, that was really abstract, but the idea being, if I want to go and let's say trade one token for another token, instead of going to like some centralized intermediary or some kind of centralized exchange, I can go to what's called a centralized exchange or DEX, which is actually just a protocol, an algorithm. And then once I like send some code that says, "Hey, I want to like sell my token and buy this other token," the algorithm will just execute that. And there's no like person in the middle, just code. Um, and so that's kind of where like the centralized finance comes from, basically the lack of financial intermediation, because the current financial system is basically completely built on and basically really premised on the idea of intermediation, which gets, a little bit to maybe like getting a little ahead of myself, but basically gets a lot of the legal issues that come up in crypto because they're premised on centralized intermediation, because that's how it's always been. And so the laws kind of deputize those intermediaries for, like basically for compliance purposes. And so that's kind of where the conflict comes in, at least legally. But yeah, so that's what decentralized finance is, basically cutting the middleman out. And the idea being that it gives more sovereignty to the individual users, makes things cheaper, right? You don't have to deal with like a bank in the middle, kind of taking their cut. Really just providing everything kind of back to the users, and cutting the middleman out.
Yeah. Okay. This is really great, and I'm excited for like where we're heading to. So I want to just dive in. You actually created this really awesome fire thread on Twitter, highlighting the aspects and your takes too on what the U.S. Treasury published regarding DeFi, and which, by the way, I saw it also being featured on Milk Road's newsletter.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just like, hey, I know him. I was reading that thread.
Yeah. Quick,
So
quick, quick, quick aside. Actually, my co-founder is like best friends with one of the initial co-founders on
oh
Milk
yeah.
Road.
Oh,
Um,
I eat that
but
as
he's
well.
actually he's not even there anymore. So actually, like it's funny that they still picked it up. But yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
So I guess I'd love for you, because you opened basically the thread saying that this is perhaps, the most pessimistic you've been regarding DeFi
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
while.
Or
So permissionless.
specifically
Yeah.
permissionless DeFi.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as you know, as a lawyer, I'm very careful with my words.
Hold
So
up.
like very intentional.
No, yeah. So please tell us a little bit about like what this is about, or like an overview so people can understand.
Yeah. So I forgot the exact time, maybe like a little over a year ago. The White House, right, the Biden administration, basically had issued an executive order. Basically, the whole idea of the executive order was to coordinate a bunch of different government agencies, because there are a ton of different government agencies doing a lot of different things, and crypto kind of touches upon a lot of different aspects, right? It's really like people think of like, when you think of crypto, they think of like just like tokens and stuff, but really it touches like a broad aspect of things, right? Like really, like what does the internet touch? Well, crypto basically touches the same thing, it's the same stuff, and so basically trying to coordinate with a bunch of agencies. A lot of times they don't talk to each other. So basically mandating them to coordinate to like to look at crypto and come up with different reports after their analysis of crypto. So pursuant to this order, the U.S. Treasury released what they call their risk assessment. There's specific things that like each agency had to do. So one of them was the Treasury Department was tasked, or one of the things that the Treasury Department was tasked with doing was issuing a risk assessment of crypto with respect to things like, and Treasury, in terms of enforcement, is kind of deputized or in charge of carrying out enforcement of the anti-money laundering laws, aka like KYC, as well as some counter-terrorism financing laws. And they're kind of related, but those, and they fall under the bucket. They basically part of this statute called the Bank Secrecy Act, so the BSA. So if you ever heard someone say the BSA, AML is anti-money laundering, CFT is countering the financing of terrorism. That's kind of all in the same bucket, and that's all enforced by United States Treasury. Taking a step back, also, as a founder or as anyone, right? Like, kind of like what I know about the law, like laws enforcement. As a lawyer, I first initially was a litigator doing securities litigation, government enforcement work. So basically represented a lot of large companies when they allegedly did something bad and either the government came knocking or shareholders sued. I ended up doing startup and VC work, corporate work as well, but I was initially a litigator and had worked with government agencies before. And like, in terms of just like your own risk assessment, everyone kind of freaks out about the SEC, but I would be significantly more concerned about pissing off Treasury, because the Treasury, like those laws, actually have some criminal potential. If you violate some of those laws, the DOJ can come after you, the Department of Justice, DOJ, in a criminal suit, if there's if they find evidence that you intentionally like violated these laws. So a good example of this is Binance. So Binance, they had a CFTC complaint. CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, they basically came after Binance, and in it, they mentioned that Binance basically helped a bunch of people evade KYC AML laws, aka these laws that I'm talking about. And CFTC that's a civil complaint. That's just them suing you, and they're in charge of like commodities and derivatives. But when you read that complaint, what I see is, there's evidence of criminal, because they helped clients evade these laws. That's criminal risk, and I would expect that the Department of Justice, I'm sure they're like about to come out with some kind of criminal lawsuit against Binance for that reason. So taking a step back, I would be significantly more concerned about violating these, anti-money laundering laws over any sort of securities laws by the SEC or any sort of commodity or derivatives laws from the CFTC. Because of the criminal aspect of it, right? Like it's one thing to just like lose your job, your company goes down, you owe a bunch of money. It's another thing like to risk your liberty. And so with that backdrop, the Treasury came out with this risk assessment, and basically what they said was, and their framing of it, right? So they kind of mentioned this at the end. It's kind of sneaked in there, but they do acknowledge that if you have a completely permissionless protocol, right, or some kind of actual DeFi, right? The laws may not apply to you, or it might be difficult for the laws to apply, or they may not apply because you kind of need someone to be able to fulfill those obligations, right? Like you need someone to be able to KYC and stuff like that. So if you just have this, like, if someone just pushed out this code, it's out there in the ether on the internet, and like people just interact with it, right? Like when you interact with it, when you send a smart contract transaction, you're just like broadcasting a message, right? If you're just broadcasting a message with this protocol, like there's not anyone kind of in the middle there who can then enact these like policies and procedures and these checks, like KYC checks and things like that, and fulfill these AML obligations, right? But again, the reason why they kind of sneak that in there and let's focus on it is that they come out swinging, basically saying that most of DeFi is kind of bullshit, and it's not actually decentralized, which is kind of true, right? So, people like to say that like DeFi is like not like just like real talk here. I know a lot of founders. I know how these projects work. I also on the legal side, I just know how all these projects are actually set up, right? The way that most DeFi projects work, and actually this is any crypto protocol, right? They're usually very centralized in the beginning, right? And the reason for this is because number one, like you're building stuff. You need to kind of iterate quickly, like any other startup, right? You need to be able to experiment, fail, iterate, and finally you hit, right? So you need to be able to move quickly. You need to be able to marshal resources quickly. Okay, that's all true. Also, it's impossible. So smart contracts are they can be immutable, right? And if you have true DeFi, then they're immutable. No one can really like mess with that code. No one can change it. right? But because no one can mess with the code, if you have like a pretty complicated like DeFi protocol, it's kind of impossible to know. So okay, people say hacks in DeFi. Most hacks aren't really hacks. People say, I think exploit's a better term. Basically, what people do is that they figure out a way with something in the code to make the protocol do something that was unintended, right? And that's because these protocols are so complicated. Like they're like not, I wouldn't say so complicated, but they're pretty complicated, and it's kind of impossible as a developer, especially if you're a small team, right? Because you may not have that much money, you're a startup, um, to figure out every single attack or edge case that someone's going to go after this protocol with or for, right? It's just like kind of impossible. And so most protocols in the early stages, and frankly, or intent, like the intention is that in the early stages, they will have what's called like admin keys. And so actually the early team can kind of change things in the protocol. It's usually like a multi-sig, right? Maybe it's like a 3 out of 5, 5 out of 7, whatever, multi-sig. So you need like 3 out of 5, so there are like 5 signers on the multi-sig. 3 need to sign to make the change, or maybe like 5 out of 7 or whatever it is, right? And they can make pretty large changes, right? Um, the fact of the matter is very few protocols. So most people say that they start off that way and they're going to actually like decentralize, progressive decentralize, and then like, burn the admin keys or whatever, right? The fact of the matter is, in the year of our Lord 2023, most protocols haven't done that. So most protocol, and I think for good reason. As a founder, I'm like, yes, and that makes sense. If I take out the legal risk side of things, that makes sense, right? Because you don't want like hundreds of millions of dollars or like of like users' funds being jeopardized or like lost or something, right? It's like, of course not, right?
Yeah, you want to be
Um,
able and do like damage control if something were to happen.
Yeah, yeah, and you just add certain safeguards in place. So maybe you like that multi-sig. You maybe have a diverse group of people. Maybe it's not just a company. Maybe you have like some like community representatives on the multi-sig, whatever, right? Like etc. Um, and you do it this way so that like if something happens, you have a false safe, right? Like you have some kind of like way out, right? The problem there is going back to intermediaries, the way that the law looks at the intermediaries is basically if you are someone who is going to take custody or control of user funds, right? You now have these AML obligations. You're what's called a money transmitter, and if you're a money transmitter, you have to register. You get a license in all 50 states. Register with FinCEN, which is the Financial Network Crime Enforcement. I forgot the exact acronym, but like they're like a division of the Treasury, um, and which costs a lot of money. It's like something like it could be like $700,000 minimum to do. Yeah. So if you want to custody any funds ever as a company or something on behalf of other people, you have to become a money transmitter. And if you're a money transmitter, all of these KYC obligations apply. Okay. So now, if there's a multi-sig with like 4, 3, 5, whatever, right? Like, so 3 people can now basically control, right, user funds because you can control the whole protocol or like upgrade the protocol or move things around. It kind of looks like you have custody and control of user funds ultimately, right? So we say non-custodial, but actually, you know, it's not. It's actually kind of custodial, right? Like it's kind of like the dirty secret of DeFi. In practical terms, right? Is that it's true, and the government, because I think they have subpoenaed a lot of these projects and have investigating them. They clearly know this, right? And I would say most people in the space who aren't builders don't actually know this. They actually think the protocols are way more like non-custodial. There's like way less control, but actually, like the founding teams in most DeFi protocols, they have control still, and they can do things. And they technically, you get the 2 or 3 people, you can move customer funds. And so their argument, the Treasury's argument, is basically like, well, even if you're like, it's not 3 people from the same company, it doesn't really matter, right? The law kind of recognizes what are called general partnerships or unincorporated associations. Like just because me, you, and I don't know, John from across the street decided to do something together, basically like in a business purpose, but don't form like an actual entity. That doesn't mean that like okay, the government can't come up after us or anything, right? Like you will have an entity or you will have an organization applied by law because you're doing things that like businesses do. So that multi-sig looks a lot like an unincorporated association or a general partnership. And it's true. Like it's like I read that, I'm like, yeah, the emperor has no clothes here. Yeah, yeah, no, seriously, yeah. It's like, and it's true, and it's like most projects, and so that means that they have to like they have a duty technically to apply these obligations, right? And if they don't, and they know they don't, right? So if you there's strict liability for international civil enforcement. So even if you don't realize you have to comply with these laws, or you don't realize that, like, oh, just because I'm a multi-sig, I now have these obligations, then you can get hit with like some civil fines. But if you know that, like, you may have some of these obligations and you don't do anything about it, you may have criminal risk. And so it looks like to me, and also the big takeaway of the whole assessment of the whole report was basically, we should increase enforcement, which means they're going to come, which I take to basically means we're going to come after people for this. And so it looked to me like a big warning shot, and basically them saying we are going to come after people for this, and we're laying out exactly our argument why as a warning. And so I think kind of most of DeFi is at the crosshairs here, which would mean that most projects would have to kind of basically either not have those upgradability aspects to it and be actually truly decentralized, which may not be a bad thing, or they're going to have to KYC every single user. Hence the permissionless aspect of like my pessimism.
Yeah. So, okay. So, parentheses. I mean, everything you said is just absolutely really interesting. And I guess, well, one of the things, KYC is know your customer. And I think for people to truly understand this is like, what is the whole point of DeFi, right? Like, what is the point of this? And why is this now causing an issue? And then I'm curious to get to like, to ask you, what do you see the future being here now that this is coming down? And if there are going to be like more people coming after these protocols or DeFi in general, what's the potential solution?
Yeah, so the reason why I think forcing a bunch of DeFi projects to KYC okay, I'll take a step back. So the purpose of the KYC laws, right, is that, kind of going back to what I was saying in the beginning, the government, because again, these laws are made with like intermediaries in mind, because that's how it's always been. The government basically says, look, there's a lot of money laundering going on, like people kind of doing illegal things, right? Or the idea is that, you know, if you want to stop like financial crimes from happening, or even just like stuff like crime generally that makes money, right? The way we stop this is to make it literally uneconomical, right? To make it so that even if you were to do something and get a shit ton of money, right, that you can't cash out your money, right? And so the idea being that if you can cut that, then there's no incentive for people to try to like commit these crimes to make this money. No incentive for fraud. No incentive for like hacking. Stealing, like all that stuff, right? And so, but the financial system is very complex. Like how do you kind of keep track of this? Well, what the government does for a lot of these, basically for anything kind of finance related, is that because the entire traditional financial system is built on intermediaries, like, okay, well, these intermediaries tend to be pretty big, right? We are actually going to deputize them and make them basically like enforce the laws for us, right? And so they're going to be in charge of enforcing the law and making sure that like no dirty money is being used by their services. Um, and then I mentioned the counter financing terrorism after 9/11. There are a bunch of laws passed related to terrorism, right? Also, the U.S. economic sanctions. So if if the U.S. issues sanctions, then J.P. Morgan's processing a bunch of payments, letting bank transfers happening between sanctioned people, it kind of defeats the purpose of the sanction, right? So they basically deputize financial intermediaries with following, with basically like clamping, like basically enforcing the laws for them, right? And so I think it's a good intent, right? But I mean, there are issues with this. Number one being that it's it's implemented in a very bad way. So there are a lot of people who, a lot of times, this happens to a lot of people. They just get like debanked for no reason, and then it's like, oh, sorry, you know, and you just like can't have access to your bank account. And it's like, how do you pay the bills? How do you live, right? Like, how access to your bank account. So that's number one. Number two is a lot of times these laws are used for as a political weapon, right? So, which is happening now with crypto, with like Operation Choke Point 2.0, basically trying to like debank a bunch of crypto companies. That basically, it could be that you're doing something that one day, could be very favorable politically, and then the next day, new people come in and it's not anymore. And then one way that they get to like, that sector is by cutting off access to the financial system through the intermediaries, because everything's controlled by the intermediaries. If they don't provide you access, you're kind of screwed, right? Um, and so that's like so those are some of the problems with like implementing KYC. The other issue, the third thing is that it stifles innovation. So most of these DeFi companies are up, they're like young startups. Like I'm a founder of a startup. I would not be able to register as a money transmitter. I don't have the money for that, right? Like it's just a lot of, and like a lot of investors, they don't want to necessarily invest in a startup if like the first $1 million have to go into like regulatory and legal fees, like because like it's just like you need that money to like build a product, right?
We need to,
And
yeah, we
so
need to make sure that it's good to go to market kind of sense, and not,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and so like so then the other thing is that it also concentrates power, right? Because no one can afford all these like the compliance for all this. And the fourth thing is that it stifles permissionlessness. So one of the other good things about DeFi is that because everything's open, using open source code, anyone can build on it, and because permissionless, anyone can kind of just like interact with it, like build on top of it, and it kind of leads to a Cambrian explosion of ideas because you just test anything out, right? If you now gate it this way, where only people who can afford, you know, like $1 million, right, in like legal and compliance fees, you're gonna have very little innovation, right, on top. And so those are kind of the issues. And one of the great things about DeFi is that it allows you to kind of just do what you want to do very quickly. And in my opinion, right, at the end of the day, everyone can kind of cash, or like anyone at the end of the day kind of needs cash, right? So I think my personal view is that all the KYC stuff should be at the centralized exchanges, because that's or the fiat, what I call the fiat on and off ramps, right? When you trade crypto for fiat, because everyone has to hit those gates at some point, right? And so, and that's already that happens now, right? For me to go on Coinbase right now, I need to KYC. So I think that's where the point should be, right? And everything internal inside of DeFi should be completely free to go. And then as soon as you want to hit the gates into the real world, into the fiat world, then that's when you have to hit those like the KYC roadblockers. In my opinion, that will kind of still support the government's mission of like, preventing money laundering, financing for terrorism, financing against like, state enemies, whatever, while still allowing for the kind of innovation and permissionlessness of DeFi.
I mean, I'm just like, absolutely. Thank you for this in depth and like sharing with us, because I agree with you. I think people that are non-technical or not developers or not really know much, we don't really understand fully, and having it be presented in very simple terms and like in this way, it's you are able to see a different picture. So I guess like very naive, but maybe what like do you this is new technology, just like we're seeing AI and all of these things, like doesn't kind of like law regulations need to change to that? But again, of course, that's never, I mean, it seems like it will never happen. What like what can we do? Like what can DeFi companies do now? Or what's like the next thing? I also saw that you posted on SEC. I mean the SEC put out another the rule change as well. So what does this even mean?
Yeah, that one is also not great. It's kind of like a double whammy, actually. So okay, so the SEC, and not just the SEC, any government agency, whenever so the way kind of government agencies work, again, just trying to like take a step back in case like people don't really know, not everyone listening to this may have like a really good understanding of this process, but basically, Congress obviously makes laws, the executive enforces laws, but there's kind of this like, and then the judiciary interprets laws, but there's almost like this fourth branch of government, and it's called the administrative state. And those are the government agencies. They're kind of quasi judicial, quasi legislative, and quasi executive. And so basically, the way they work is that Congress passes some kind of law, right? that then kind of provides certain powers to the agencies. And because Congress knows that, like, we don't know in-depth securities laws well, or like how like exchanges should be set up, we're going to provide in those laws a lot of discretion to the SEC, to kind of come up with what are called rules to like work with this, because they're going to be filled with subject matter experts, and they're going to be spending their whole time on this area, and so they'll know significantly better than us. Plus, they'll be able to adapt much quicker than like passing laws in Congress, right? So that's how agencies work. That's SEC is in charge of dealing with like securities and certain derivatives, as well as exchanges for like the interactions, the exchange of securities, as well as like some other things like investment advisors and things like that. And so there's a process called that all agencies have to follow when they're passing laws, including or when they're proposing rules, and we're going to pass a rule. It's called the notice and comment period. And so when they first are like going to pass a rule, they have to be like, okay, here's our rule. And they give like, I think like a certain time period where the public is supposed to comment on it, and then they're supposed to address all the concerns, right? And then they enact it. But like it can be the most heavily criticized proposed rule in the world, and it can still enact it anyway. But they just have to address it, because yeah, they just have to address it. And then the idea being that like, if there's not like any reasonable basis, but that's like pretty easy to get through, then you can sue and challenge that rule. So that's what they just did now with this rule, related to what's called communications protocols for exchanges. They had closed it before, but they just like reopened the notice and comment period. And so that means they're going to try to enact this rule. And like, they've reopened this notice and comment period, and basically what this rule does is it basically says any sort of communications protocol that facilitates basically the exchange of securities, will be considered a securities exchange. Nobody in their right mind, like if you think registering as a money transmitter is bad, registering as a securities exchange is like millions of dollars just to get the initial kind of registration in, and then like probably like $1 million plus, I don't know, like a lot of money, probably close to that every year for ongoing compliance, right? You don't see a lot of securities exchanges popping up for a reason. And so that would mean, so what's communications protocol? And so in the rule, they very, and some of the comments, like some of their comments to the rule, they very squarely are like addressing DeFi and basically saying like any protocol that facilitates a securities exchange, basically like has to register as an exchange. And then there are very broad terms. So even if you were to have like a very broad or a very permissionless protocol that's actually decentralized, right? So not what we are talking about before with the admin keys, but really true DeFi, right? There's stuff in there that basically said there's basically broad language in there that kind of suggests that even like a developer who may potentially deploy that protocol could potentially be like slammed here for this, because for assisting this communications protocol. And obviously every startup, right, that the DeFi startup, they're not just like also like deploying the code, they're also like marketing it. They're doing a lot of stuff for it, right? Getting the community together, and that's all kind of like facilitating this communications protocol, right? And they're pretty explicit about it. Like, yes, that's exactly what this does. And so basically any sort of protocol that has any sort of exchange of security tokens would count. And frankly, the SEC would probably find that a lot, which they've said explicitly, that a lot of tokens are securities. And so it would really take down these decentralized exchanges. Yeah, it's like not great. That being said, I think there are a lot of potential like First Amendment challenges, because like deploying code, there's a lot of like First Amendment protections there, because it's speech. Because everyone thinks about this, but you're just communicating, right? Like when you're like when you're like doing a smart contract transaction, when you're like deploying a protocol, you're just sending a message, right? And sending a message is speech, right? Like I can like write something down on paper and like mail or just like hold it up or hold a poster up, right? Like that's the same thing you're doing. You're literally just like writing something down, broadcasting it, aka like basically just like writing something on a poster and taking it to the town square and holding it up, and then someone sees the poster, aka like the protocol, and they do stuff with it from like your words, right? From your message. So that's kind of how like the internet works, right? That's how all this stuff works. And so it is free speech, and so there are free speech implications here, where it will absolutely like get challenged, but it's still not a great. It's just not a great development.
Yeah, I mean, I think hearing everything that's going on is just they're trying to really just put a lot of barriers in the moving forward in innovation in crypto, and I feel like that's really it's going to hurt. But hopefully, this breeds a lot of creativity and union. Um, yeah, and like community coming together and finding ways for to not be stopped.
My working theory is that I think it kind of see. I could be. There's no basis for this, but my my speculation is that they're trying to give the technology, I think, to TradFi. That's what it looks like. It looks like they're trying to like get, because there are traditional institutions that are very interested in the tech, but they don't like the speculation. They don't have control, right? And so they're basically forcing control back to intermediaries. Who are the biggest intermediaries? Wall Street. And so it's easy. Any laws, any rules that get passed, it's very easy for them to like comply with it, right? Because they already have most of it set up, and they have a lot of money, so it doesn't matter. So it kind of looks to me like they're trying to give DeFi away to TradFi.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely not unfounded at all. Like I can totally see how. Okay, I know we extended our time, but I think this is going to be really exciting. Please talk to us about Lexproof and how this also is and what supports what we were talking about in today's conversation.
Yeah, so Lexproof, my startup, we're building Web3 native compliance infrastructure. The idea is to build products that allow you to comply with laws, but to do so in the what most Web3 native way possible, so that for our customers are like apps, businesses, so that they can actually comply with the laws, but like do it in a way that doesn't cause or that causes the least amount of friction for their products, right? Because a lot of current compliance solutions, they're clearly not made for on-chain activity, and so they kind of create a very just not like a very kind of just not great user experience. Um, and Yeah, and so our first product is it's called Certified to ZK Compliance Verification Product. What does that mean? So basically, so ZK means zero knowledge. So basically, um, we issue what are called verified credentials. Um, and this relates to kind of like identity solutions. If you ever heard of like DIDs or decentralized IDs, DIDs, this is like we actually use a DID solution for this, or like a DID protocol, basically. I would say it's a solution, but anyways, and so the way it works is users basically will get issued these what are called verified credentials. You can think of verified credentials. I'm just going credentials from now on. They're almost similar to NFTs, except the difference between an NFT and a credential is that no one can see the verified credential, right? Which is key because if you're dealing with like things like KYC or under the securities laws, there are like things like accredited investor verifications, or accredited investor status, qualified purchaser status, that like basically to get one of those statuses, you need to have like a lot of money or generate a certain amount of income. There's certain thresholds you need to meet, or it's just like sensitive financial or sensitive personal information for KYC. You don't want this in an NFT, right? Because like the world can see it and it's public. And so with a verified credential, no one can see it until the user themselves discloses it via a ZK proof or a zero knowledge proof. Zero knowledge, it's the underlying tech is very complicated, but the concept is pretty simple. What zero knowledge tech allows is it allows someone to prove some kind of result or assertion without showing the work done for that, or like the underlying computation or underlying information.
Yeah,
Um,
which is like
and
keep
so
our
it's
privacy, as you were mentioning.
Yeah, so ZK tech is privacy tech. You can think of privacy tech, but it's also used for scalability. So if you heard a lot of like rollups or like layer two blockchains, or basically methods to scale blockchains are leveraging ZK tech because if you can only, again, because like a big problem with like blockchains is they don't have a lot of like computing power, right? Because you need to be decentralized, you need to make it so anyone can kind of run a node or a validator, right? It needs to be easy. So you can't have like super heavy performance requirements on them. And so so it makes it very hard to have a lot of transactions, right? Like a billion transactions, it's just like you don't have to compute for that. And so with ZK proofs, you can have like the computations happen off chain, and then you can provide this proof on chain that maybe only has, I'm just throwing a number out, like what, like 0.1% of like the data or like compute required to kind of like do all the underlying stuff, right? And so because you're only getting the proof and you can validate that proof, you can validate all the things that's going on with just that proof. You can save a lot of just a lot of like data and things like that, a lot less compute with just having that ZK proof. So it's used for scalability as well, and also privacy. And so we're using it for privacy. And so it basically, the product, we haven't launched, we haven't gone live with it yet, but basically it will provide end users with a portable and private credential that would allow them to that they can take with them anywhere. So you only have to kind of like KYC once, or do like an accredited investor check once, and then no one can see it, and then you can take it to like other apps. And anyone who accepts that credential, you can just provide them with ZK proof, and you can go right in without having to kind of like do the whole KYC process again, or do like accredited investor checks again. It's not like, in an ideal world, I think we just like wouldn't have, you wouldn't have to do like all these verifications and compliance stuff. So, but the idea is to be kind of like this happy medium where it's like, okay, this is something as a company, as an app, you can use to comply with regulations, but it still provides your end users with this very like private, self-sovereign um, credential. And so you're doing it in a more kind of Web3 native way. Plus, those credentials can be used on chain and off chain. So it can be used like for a protocol, it can be used for a smart contract. So it's also more composable as opposed to, let's say, some sort of like current kind of compliance off chain solutions.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you broke it down really simply because I've been trying to dive into zero knowledge, and I'm like, okay. But thank you again for being here. We extended a little bit of our time. Before you go though, I wanted to wrap up with sharing this tweet that you put out that kind of caught my eye, because one of the other controversial topics definitely is AI. And you said, it's not AI replacing lawyers that lawyers should be worried about, but rather lawyers using AI replacing other lawyers. Please share a little bit more about this and your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think a lot of and so I'm pretty pro AI, but I think a lot of anti AI people tend to well, first off, they look at the tech now and they're like, well, it's like messing up, and it's like, okay, man, like look at the exponential curve that's happening. But the other thing is, they see no world, right, where like certain tasks that they do, or certain jobs can be completely replaced by AI, which I do think that's a lot more uncertain. Like, will we have what's called like general AI? Who knows, right? Like, or general artificial intelligence, um, or but like who knows, right? Like, but I can tell you right now, I've been using it. I've been using ChatGPT, and specifically like ChatGPT Plus, so it gives you access to GPT-4, which is kind of like the most advanced model. That I think you can only have access to if you pay for it. It's like $20 a month, so I think it's totally worth it. It has, so I've done legal work with it, and it has 100% sped up like my legal work by a lot, right? And that's not just with legal work. I've spoken to many developers where it's sped up a lot of their coding, right? And what this means is that you just need less of these people, right? Like accounting, you can imagine, certain types of project management, writing, copy editors. I think like some designers, you name it. A lot of these things are, the people who are kind of like, no, it won't, like, we won't be replaced. It's not like the AI replacing you that you need to be worried about. It's like me using AI and you not using AI that you need to be worried about, because I can now do things like 10x faster.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that many of us that are in this space can kind of see that these type of technologies are really important. And if you don't use them, you kind of will be left out. But maybe when you are out in other fields, and I'm guessing law, any other field too, you that is really kind of outdated, that doesn't like innovation too much, perhaps will pause and not really sure if this is something that they want to be involved. And like you said, I think I hear a lot of friends that are also hesitant, not really sure. Heard them say, "Oh, but it's like spitting out bad knowledge. It's not really," but it's like it's in the baby infancy stages, and we just need to play with it.
Yeah, and right now it's in its baby infancy stages, and it's making me a lot faster right now.
Yeah, imagine. Yeah,
Right, right. So now imagine like 2 years from now, 3 years from now, right? And even if it doesn't improve that much from right now, honestly, like I think yeah, right now I think honestly like if I were a law firm right now, right, I could if I had like 10 lawyers and I had everyone using like ChatGPT efficiently, honestly, I could probably cut like two of those lawyers at least, maybe three. Honestly, probably a little more. Like that's right now. That's with the errors. And also, no one should use ChatGPT for legal advice. I think you need to kind of be a lawyer because like it does make mistakes, and in law, you make one false move, one wrong move, and you're in a really bad position. But because I do know stuff, like it's easy for me to verify stuff, and so I know how to use it in a way that I don't have to really worry about things being wrong, but it can just speed up my work.
yeah. You just leverage it for sure. Well, thank you so much, Orlando, for coming and sharing your thoughts and everything. All of the information you provided about Lexproof will be in the links, but are there any last things that you want to say?
Um, Go outside and touch grass, right? It's springtime. I think a lot of times people spend way too much time. I think especially in tech, people spend way too much time indoors. Kind of like bringing it back to the first thing we talked about.
Yeah.
Take care of your health. See your friends. See your family. Touch grass. We're social people. We're social beings. Um, you know, and take advantage of the spring and summer.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I hope everyone listening in or watching found this as interesting as I did. I'm totally geeking out, probably going to re listen. Um, but share it with people that you love, hit subscribe. It really helps just grow the pod even more and have awesome guests like you. I hope everyone has a good day.